Hi everyone and good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar. Just going to just give everyone just a minute to join the room. You can see the numbers are building there. Whilst I do that, I might do our Acknowledgement of Country. So I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the various lands that we're all upon today. We acknowledge the deep and ongoing spiritual attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to country. We also pay our respect to the elders, past, present and emerging. Thank you. All right, we've got a lot to get through and I think we will get started. So today we're focused on ILO, Individualised Living Options, and trying to help you understand everything there is to know about it at an introduction level, but we are going to dig a little deeper as well. We do have part two, where we will we'll talk about other areas, but we'll introduce how ILO and SDA can work together as well. And feel free to say hi there in the chat, which I'll show you just quickly how to use this software. So if you can't see the screen exactly like it is here, there's two speech bubbles in that red box there. Click on that and that will open up this area here where it says chat polls handout. So if you chat in there and everyone's writing hi back, you can ask questions in there. You'll also see polls and handouts. So throughout the webinar, we may have a couple of polls. So we'll let you know when they're happening where you can vote. Feel free also to ask some questions in there. We will have dedicated time at the end for questions, so about 15 minutes. But if there's quick ones as we go, I'll try and capture them. And if I can interrupt our speakers, I will. There's also going to be handouts. So as the speakers refer to handouts, go into the handouts option up there and you can actually download them. So we don't need to send them to you after, but keep in mind, we will send you the recording of the webinar at the end of the, and they'll go to your registered email at the end of the webinar. All right, so we've got, we've teamed up with Scope again. So just a little on Scope, range of disability services, support coordination, the best, where they also offer care providing and, but importantly for this webinar, they also offer stage one. So Scope does the stage one, and some people may know that Scope and DSA, Disability Services Australia, joined 6 months ago or so now, and DSA actually offer ILO's stage two. So if that means nothing to you, it will mean something to you at the end of this webinar. And I'm from BlueCHP. BlueCHP is a not-for-profit. We're a tier one community housing provider. We're also a registered provider of SDA under the NDIS. We're a little bit different in the sense that we start with a client, so it could be your client, and we look to build them an SDA home that suits them, just like anyone would when they want to buy a home. So if, I guess the only thing I would say to you is if you do have people in your caseload that you think may need SDA, give us a call. We've got a team of SDA housing specialists. All right, to our speakers. So again, we've teamed up with Hayley Maxwell. I think she's the go-to person when it comes to everything support coordination, in particular around accommodation from SDA to ILO to everything else. So thank you, Hayley, for joining us. She's the manager of New South Wales for support coordination, and a very special guest we have today, Marita Walker. So welcome, Marita. She's a former CEO, but very importantly, she is the ILO guideline co-author in consulting to the agency when ILO was first developed. So thank you for joining us, Marita. So we have two experts here. Let's get underway. So over to you, Hayley. And you're on mute.
I always do that. I can see some people are having trouble with their sound. Maybe Jess might help you.
Yeah, we've also got Jess in the background here. So there's Jessica Ford. So she's actually BlueCHP's marketing manager. So she's in the background. She'll try and sort these things out. So over to you, Hayley.
Beautiful. So we appreciate you coming today and taking interest in ILO. So today, Marita and I will be giving you a high-level overview of individualised living options. Marita will start us off by looking at what is ILO, ILO within the context of the NDIA, so how ILO came about. She'll be looking at eligibility, and then I will be coming on and looking at the different stages of ILO, the role of an ILO provider, and the common models of ILO. I'll hand it over to Marita to get started.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Now, what we're going to do as the very first thing is just get some indication by using a poll that is part of this Demio product. And that will appear now in your chat. And really what we're interested in getting some sense of is how familiar you are with the ILO guidelines. So they are the product that describes how what is ILO and how it works and how decisions are made. So we'll just give you a few moments to respond to the poll. It's great. I can see that you're all got the hang. Many people have got the hang of it, and we're now at over half of the people who are on the call.
So we've got a winner there at about 40% so far. I've read a little, but not all.
Okay, well, I'll let you finish that off, and it's enough now to tell me that for most of you, this is probably an important introduction because they're not. It's not a document that you know well, and what I hope that you will find is that you'll have an introduction after the webinar today, and you'll be excited and motivated to go and read those guidelines more fully and apply them to some people that you are talking to, and people and families you're talking to. So I want to start off in terms of a little bit of history and background. The concept of what we now call individualised living options is not new. I come from Western Australia, and in the role that I had prior to joining the NDIA, with an organisation that, among others in WA, were using individualised funding to create options that looked like ILO and were ILO. They just didn't have that label. So they were unnamed, but they were occurring across the country, not just in WA, and across the world. I shouldn't say that this is exclusive to Australia. Many of the early examples and where we looked in the early days for support and inspiration was the UK and Canada and other places. So it was used, and there were hundreds of people living in these arrangements before the NDIS came in as being accepted by WA to become part of the national scheme. And there's been work done because they didn't fit easily into what was the price guide and the options for people's living arrangement. And that was pretty obvious to me when I was the trial site manager here in WA for the NDIS. So I then moved from operations into a more of a policy role and worked for some time to have more value and understanding, valuing and understanding within the NDIA about what individual living options were about and why they were important and needed to be available to everyone. So you might have been aware, if you're been in this around for a while, that there was some specific line items introduced into the price guide, and there were interim arrangements in place for a number of years while the definitive guideline, or at least the initial guideline, was developed. So that the ILO guidelines were released in April 2021. So we've just passed the 12-month milestone. You'll also, I would also recommend that you look at the home and living consultation paper and the outcomes of that. ILO features as a way of the future for more people than are using this option now. So you'll also see that into the chat we'll have included the link directly to the guidelines. So highly recommend that that you have a look at those. So what is an ILO? The I is very important because it's individualised, and that's what this whole intent is about, is that we're looking for people to live lives in the way that everyone else does, and they have variety of arrangements about where they live, who they live with, that they've chosen, and that may change throughout their lifespan. So the individualised is very important. It is the living arrangement. It's not trying to talk about the whole life, but it's absolutely focused on what the individual support needs are and how they can be very best met. It incorporates formal supports, and if people have informal supports and those supports are wanting to continue to be part of the regular life of their family member, then that's wonderful. It's what happens in many other people's lives, and it can be incorporated in a way that's very much a partnership. An ILO is separate from housing, so that's one of the reasons that this session's being held. It's ILO in the context of SDA, but ILO can be delivered and it can occur in any kind of housing. Might be someone that has been fortunate enough to have housing that's come from their family, can be private rental, can be community housing. Any kind of housing is a possibility for the support within the home to come from an ILO. And the flexibility is that we're talking about a package, and this can involve different ways for the support to be provided. Different from 8 hours of rostered support from a support worker. So there are numerous ways that this can occur. The guidelines talk about there being 2 stages. It was really important to have this first stage as a formal and separate line item and funding, because unless you've done that first stage of exploration, really thinking carefully about who is the person, what does their life looks like so far, what are their strengths, what do they want their life to look like in the future in terms of where they live, and how might the supports look around them to make that possible. So to have exploration is absolutely pivotal, and it is therefore described in the guideline as being a separate piece of work to be done. It is pretty likely to be different people who are involved in the design to actually then delivering the supports, which is stage 2. So we'll talk more about that as we move through. But the individualised aspect, a package of supports, and careful and thoughtful and design over a period of time are the 2 main elements. So just to then be even more explicit about what it isn't. It's not a group home arrangement where people with disabilities are grouped together. They haven't chosen who they live with and may or may not get on with them in any way at all. It's not a placement where children or adults just have to have a place has to be found so that they have a roof over their head with families. It's not any kind of facility or hostel or other shared accommodation service. Probably most importantly, to point out, it's not a program of one-to-one rostered care where you're talking about support workers who are likely to be engaged for a number of people, who have a roster that involves 3 rosters across a 24-hour period and across a whole week. That is not individualised. It doesn't fit the ILO descriptor. Importantly, when we're talking about the individualised living option, community participation is not in part of what you're taking into account. We all have lives that have a home base and things that we do outside our home, either in employment or in recreation or both, or people and things that we do. So in the community participation employment sort of definitions that we have within the NDIS, community participation is separate from the individualised living option. It's often very critical, as is employment, if people have employment, because it needs to be taken into account when you think about the 24 hours of a person's day. So they are absolutely complementary and often completely interdependent, because you need to, if someone does require some level of supervision and monitoring for 24 hours, then the community participation and employment needs to match the support that's provided within the ILO. And there can be, the other thing it isn't is something that is a standardised solution that fits into a pre-existing inflexible service option that doesn't take into account the specific needs of the individual. So it's pretty quick to find some organisations that are offering something that they call ILO, but when you look at it, it's actually this last dot point. It's a home, they've got 3 other people and they want an ILO and the funding to fit someone else in. That is not an ILO. So who is it for? Eligibility is a bit of a hard black and white term, and their guidelines actually use the language of would suit, would most likely work for, those kinds of things, because this isn't a hard border, and many people should be considered for an individualised approach. It is for adults. Very quick exception is people who have been in foster arrangements under child protection in the various jurisdictions. That may be an arrangement that can continue, and planning might well start before someone's 18 for that to be carefully thought through as to whether that is the best option for them, at least for another 3, 4 or 5 years. We've used the term moderate support needs here, as although that can mean different things to different people. And to try and have some indication about what that might mean, the guidelines actually use the term of 6 hours support a day. That doesn't have to translate so literally as that it's 6 hours of person-to-person support each day, because there might be less than that's required every day, but there might be occasions in which support will be called upon that averages out something like that. Might be different each day of the week. So think about that as more of an average and not strictly about person-to-person support. The sorts of cohorts that this is worth thinking about is people who are seeking an alternative to a group home. There's lots of people and who live in those situations for whom it's not working for them, or they've not known of any alternatives and they were looking for something else. The other cohort are for people who are living with their family and are seeking to move into a place of their own, just as their siblings have done or expect to do in normal situations. Again, why should it be different for someone because of their disability? So how does it work? Now, we've got some, yes, so the guidelines are now there in the chat for you. So this slide is a description of the process that I've used in webinars that were done just after the guidelines were introduced, and I'm expecting that as support coordinators, you'll be pretty familiar with the home and living request form. It's been around for a couple of years now. That's not necessarily this absolute starting point, because I want to emphasise that these are discussions that you might want to have. The people should be starting to think about well before you're really needing an alternative living arrangement. So it's important. It's an expectation. So starting conversations early is important. Again, thinking about siblings who might start to think about those where their friends they might live with and how they might share some accommodation, even if it's something that they do when they're 20, 21 and not 18. So then when you're getting to within 6 or 12 months or 2 years of it looking like it could be something that you really want to happen, then that's the time at which you want to have a home and living goal. I don't need to talk about the importance of goals. And then complete a home and living request form, which is initially to seek the exploration and design funding. But it doesn't mean that exploration and design can't have been done within other supports or as part of a prompting process that people are thinking about. You don't have to wait to get the funding to start the thinking and the conversation. So then there's a decision, it's a delegate decision for inclusion of the exploration and design funding, and a period of at least 6 months. Often this can extend to a year, 2 or 3 if you have more complex situations that you're planning for, particularly if that involves property. At the end of exploration and design, you're coming up with a service proposal that's been developed in partnership with a provider who's actually going to deliver and oversight the option. And then you're coming back with the service proposal to be considered for stage 2, which is the actual supports. So that's a further delegate decision. And just depending on how all the timing works out, how long the plan is, about whether you might need to initiate that review through change of circumstance for the consideration of the stage 2 decision. So how the model is funded, this is described in the guidelines, and there are 3 levels of funding, both for stage 1 and for stage 2. So there are some descriptions in the guidelines, which I'll encourage you to look at to give a sense of what is the quantum of exploration and design funding that might be $3,000, $5,000 or $10,000. And it is specifically for this exploration and design, which may be done by a wide range of people, which can include a support coordinator if as a support coordinator you have the appropriate experience and skills. But I strongly encourage families to think about how they might seek that support from peers or from capacity building organisations, and to be able to use that funding in quite flexible ways. At stage 2, there's again 3 levels of funding. It doesn't mean that it's not intended to mean that there can't be a service proposal that can be funding between those levels, but these are the upper limits for each of the bands of funding. And there are some more descriptors in the guidelines about that. Being applied quite literally, I'm finding at the moment, but it'll give you some indication. So then if we move on to what is the funding, so the exploration and design is capped at the core support, the rate for of $100, and it's a part of core supports. The stage 2, as I said, a package is really important, and so there's a primary support is essential in every service proposal, and there needs to be a supplementary support. There may be more than one. So we'll talk a bit more about what they might each look like, but that is the really core package element of an individualised living option, because you have the monitoring that enables the supports within the package to be used flexibly across the life of the package. And those are the sorts of things that need to be part of the design and then recorded in the service proposal. So the service proposal form it'll be downloaded so that you can be on the chat, so that you can be aware of what that looks like when you get to the end of a explore and design phase. Over to you, Hayley.
Thanks, Marita. All right, so what I'll do is we'll just have a quick look at the different stages now. So a true ILO is person-centered. So the person is at the center of all the decision-making. So during this stage, someone who is trained in ILO exploration and design will understand how to engage in conversations with the customer and their supporters and work out what a good life looks like to them. They'll go about understanding their wants and needs and co-design, and I have to stress the word co-design, a model that allows the customer ultimate choice and control over the home and living environment. They'll also engage, if they have, informal supports and create a circle of supports that work and work to strengthen these relationships. So this will happen over multiple sessions. As Marita said earlier, this ILO stage 1 may take 6 months, it may take 2 years, depending on the complexities of the individual, the situation. You know, sometimes it's a really simple process. Things are fairly well set up when they get into stage 1. Sometimes it's really complicated. It might be they're moving to the other side of the country. They're moving to an area where they don't have the support networks around them. So during this stage, you are working on setting those types of things up. So an ILO, like Marita said before, usually incorporates formal and informal supports. However, it can cater for people who don't have informal supports. I think there is this perception out there that if they don't have informal supports, then we just need to put people straight into a group home model. So this can cater for people that also have limited informal supports. And this is what stage 1 is for, helping to build up supports and connections with community. So during this stage, the ILO coordinator or exploration and designer, whatever they want to call themselves, will really look at the risks of the designs that they look at. So risks seem to be a topic that everyone wants to talk about. Oh, the risks in ILO. What we seem to have moved away from is dignity of risk. People have dignity of risk and should have the choice over how their life looks. Okay, so it really is in this stage, the risk analysis we're doing is more around providing the appropriate information for people to make informed decisions about their own lives, okay? And helping with risk mitigation strategies to ensure that people are provided opportunities to live the way they wanted to live and have strategies to keep them safe. And it might be things like assistive technology, it might be, a good neighbour, there's all different types of support that you can put in place during this stage 1 to make sure it works. Okay, so as you can see there, we've got the line item there. Looks very similar to the line item of support coordination. It's charged the same. You can also bill things like non-face-to-face support, short notice cancellations, reports, provider travel, all the things that we generally bill as support coordinators can be done under the exploration and design. But note, this sits in the customer's core supports, okay? So please, when we're going to this, make sure that when we're getting the funding that you're getting it to sit under the core supports and it's not just an added extra put into the support coordination. So at the end of exploration and design, you're developing a service proposal. So that service proposal is the quote, okay? So it is a plan of what the service will look like for the customer. And at this stage, so that's not just going to be developed by the ILO stage 1 provider. So before the end of stage 1, you have started to work together with a stage 2 provider. And that may be the same provider as a follow-on process, or it might be another provider. Okay, so if it is another provider, you need to engage them during this initial process of creating the service proposal. All right, and for stage 1, once we've created the service proposal, it is also the stage 1 provider's job to help advocate for the family in terms of what they wanted. So to make sure that it doesn't get to stage 2 and their design gets looked at differently and gets changed to make sure it suits what the provider wants to deliver. It really is a person-centered approach. So you've got to try and make sure the provider is delivering what the customer wants. All right, so we've looked at this briefly, so I won't go into this too much, but getting the funding for ILO. So the first step is, of course, you need to be having discussions, identifying whether ILO is the appropriate supports. Then we complete the home and living request form. I think we've just got that dropped in. Yes, so we've just dropped that into the handouts. If you want to download that, you've probably seen this before. It is a really long document and it's actually designed to be done with the customer. So I know as support coordinators, we like to just fill things out and, do those sorts of things. This is one you need to sit with the customer. It is about having real conversations around what you would like in your home and living package. In this form, if ILO has been identified, you need to make sure you have an appropriate goal and be clear that ILO is part of that goal. Okay, so we need a housing goal around ILO, and we also need to make sure we're triggering and asking for the ILO funding in the plan. With this, I would be handing that form in with some evidence to support what you're asking for. So the type of evidence you'd be looking at is anything that proves that they're going to need a higher level of support than just a drop-around support model. So it might be that they need support outside of scheduled hours. So it might be an on-call support or anything like that. In home and living, for us as support coordinators, we've always gone and got functional capacity assessments that give exact recommendations on what the support should look like. That goes against what ILO is. Okay, so in this circumstance, you might get a functional capacity assessment that recommends ILO and exploring ILO, but it wouldn't be they need to live by themselves with 2 people doing a co-resident model, so you don't give specific recommendations. It is about the person creating the support that they want. So letters of support, reports, anything that says that a level of monitoring would be helpful and maybe a more individualized option would be suitable. Okay, so as we looked at before, Explore and Design comes at 3 levels. So you might get $3,000 or you might get up to $10,000 allocated for this section. All right, so the support stage. So stage 2 is really about the execution of the model. It is putting all the elements together to ensure that it works and is sustainable. So again, this section is quotable and allows the provider to provide support to a customer that hasn't historically been seen in the NDIS. So a stage 1 provider and the customer will engage the stage 2 provider unless they're the same service. Then they'll create the service proposal. So the service proposal will include primary supports. So the primary supports are the main support of the arrangement. So it might be the host family, it might be a mentor, it might be the housemates living with the customer. And then it will also include supplementary supports, which is anything that helps to keep the arrangement sustainable. So it might be on-call supports, it might be a good neighbour. And don't forget, these supports may not all be paid supports. So when we do the service proposal, it includes both the involvement of any informal unpaid supports as well as paid supports. Okay, so that's why they call it a service. I talk about it being a quote because we do put money in there and what it's going to cost, but it is a service proposal because you're outlining things that aren't going to cost money as well in those supports. And then you've got the monitoring supports. Now, I can't stress how important the monitoring supports are. So the monitoring supports is basically the glue that holds the ILO together. It is the key to the success of the model. Okay, so once it is approved, the provider will execute the design. So we've done the service proposal, we've submitted it to NDIS, and now the provider, it is up to the stage 2 provider to execute the design. The monitoring and the built-in coordination is the defining difference. Okay, so an ILO provider will help facilitate and support the customer and their family throughout the whole housing experience. This help really does enhance the customer journey. Now, when I talk about the whole housing experience, it's important to note that the actual housing itself doesn't sit as the primary responsibility of the ILO provider. So when we think of ILO, it's the supports within the house. So there is a clear separation. So as a support coordinator or as a family member or as a support staff, you would be working as a team to get the appropriate housing. So whether it is ILO or community housing applications, it is a team effort when we're trying to access the housing. Okay, so if it doesn't seem to be working in stage 2 and you need to have some small changes or you need to redesign the whole package, it doesn't go back to stage 1. And I think that is a bit of confusion there, that people expect it to go back to stage 1. It stays with stage 2 for this, for the redesign section. Okay, so the role of an ILO provider. All right, so an ILO provider plays the critical role in understanding the person's vision for an ordinary life. So it's all about being person-centered and ensuring that we start with the person and build the supports out around the person, and not having providers come in and getting someone to fit a vacancy or to fit something that is suitable for their accommodation. So it is about having providers who understand how to create person-centered and individualised models. Realistically, in New South Wales, there are very few organisations that have experience in this within the NDIS, okay? Because we don't have a huge amount of providers in doing ILO. That's something that we are finding more and more providers are coming on board with, but we're going to go through this period where it is going to be a real learning experience for a lot of our providers providing ILO, because in New South Wales particularly, we have really been stuck on providing this whole SIL model. You know, that has been the model of choice for quite a number of years. So it's getting everyone's head back into individualized approach. Okay, so an ILO can be delivered by a range of providers, or it can be delivered by one, just the ILO provider. So the main thing is the ILO provider must provide the monitoring and support, but a person might come to you and they might have a range of support workers they're already working with. They might have, there might be an on-call service that you come in from an external provider. So it can be a range of different providers, or the ILO provider might do all the supports, it might do all of it. So it's going to be individual for each person. Again, it might not be the same provider doing stage 1 and stage 2. It might be 2 different providers, but stage 1 and stage 2 need to work together to make sure they're providing something they want. All right, so what an ILO might look like. So these are 3 common arrangements that we see. Our ILO guidelines talk to these arrangements. But again, don't get stuck on these arrangements. These are just examples of what things could look like. So the number 1 is host family. So a host family is when a customer moves into the home of a non-related family member. So the participants get the security of being part of a family and benefits from the connections and the inclusions. However, unlike all the other designs, there is no security of tenure in this. So if the customer's not happy, the person is not happy with that arrangement, and they have to move out of the home. We see this arrangement used a lot in foster care. So if you have someone who's 17 looking to turn 18, and they're wanting to stay in their foster home, a host arrangement can be used to make it an ILO. Okay, so the next one is housemates. So that's where an individual is full-time with people who provide care, help, and companionship. All right, so there's a few ways this can work. So it could be that the person just moves in with family and friends, and there is no payment incentive for living together, because it's just a natural way to do things. You move out, when you move out, you might move out with your best friend, you might move out with your brother or your cousin, whoever. And there's no payment incentive. You move out because you love spending time together. In this arrangement, we use the phrase housemates because that is what they are. Okay, they are your housemates. They are not your live-in support workers. Okay, so it is the types of the support you would be providing is around companionship. It is not, and anything else would be supplemented with formal supports. There is also another model you could use, like a co-residency model, where you look where a person moves in with a person living with disabilities for a payment incentive. And that often looks like a rent subsidy of some sort. It might be just a reduction, or it might be a full rent subsidy. In this case, again, ideally all relationships with this model are as natural as possible. So any of the support should be the support that a housemate will give. So it is things like cooking, cleaning. It might be transport. So you might be, you get dropped to the gym every morning. The housemate drops him to the gym every morning on the way, on his way to work. So they're things that you would do naturally with a housemate, and anything like personal care would need to be supplemented through formal supports. So the next one is mentors. So we use the term mentors because the expectations are slightly higher than that of just a regular support worker. So generally, in an ILO arrangement, you would use a small team of paid supports that is exclusive to the participant. So the participant, a good ILO provider, will have the participant part of the recruitment process. So, and often they're staying with the participant for longer periods of time. So they might have an overnight, a couple of days with the participant, and then no days. So it really does change and look different to your regular rostered supports, and they might be paid on retainer. There's all different ways to implement your mentors or your support staff within. So in this circumstance, the person might be living alone and they have a team of support staff come in and do various support within the home. Again, the defining difference with all of these arrangements is that you have a monitoring support overseeing these arrangements and coordinating it and making sure that everything's running smoothly. So again, those are just examples. It's not a menu of ILO designs. They're just examples. So don't limit your thinking. Individualized living options are any type of supports that is individualized. So we have one now, which is a person is using an ILO within a university dorm. I think we've just dropped in 19 stories of social inclusion. It's worth having a read so you can have a look at different examples of ILO arrangements. So, NDIS has really needed to evolve for quite some time. So people living with disabilities have been provided quite limited choices around their home and living. As support coordinators, we are at the front line of driving change within the industry by providing options to our customers outside of the regular SIL models. Scope and the NDIA have teamed up in doing a research project. So we want to understand how supports received can help people live where and how they want to live. So if you are willing, and please be willing, can you take part in a survey that will help us understand what the NDIS can do to better support participants to move towards more individualised living options and have more say, choice and control over where the participants live and how they live. So we have two surveys. The first is for NDIS participants, those who have intellectual disability, autism, Down syndrome, psychosocial or cerebral palsy. The second is for supporters, so family members, carers, paid support workers, and other paid staff such as support coordinators. So the survey will take about 20 minutes to complete, and it's also available in easy English. So we've just dropped it in there, and we'll also send a link out in an email after our session, because the feedback will really play a pivotal role in the development of home and living policies within the NDIS. So please, I encourage all of you, get together with your customers and your families and have your say to drive meaningful change within the sector. And I think that's about wraps us up.
All right, thank you. So we've got a number of questions. So Marita and Hayley, if you want to click on where it says public all, then there's a question mark with 15. If you click on the 15 there, but I'll go back to the oldest question, which was at 113 from Renee. And I think the context was ILO. Can ILO work? Can this include community housing? I'm not sure of the context there. Does that make sense? Can this include community housing? And that was when you were talking, Marita. You're on mute.
Yes, I've got. So yes, the community housing will be the housing part. So ILO can be the support within whatever the villa or house or
accommodation. Yeah.
Accommodation. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Melinda asked about the service proposal. Is that a standard document? Did you cover that?
Yes.
Yeah, it is a standard document. Good. Sam P, if two people were both eligible at level 2, for example, and wanted to share a home together with, say, other young non-disabled housemates, can they each receive the 150K package, or will both packages be reduced as per SIL? Who wants to take that one?
Well, they can both have an ILO package. They would share, they'd have half of some of the supports. If they were sharing some supports, they'd each pay half in their proposal, but there'll be definitely things that they each have that are individual in their proposal, and I would expect there'll be some elements that are shared, and they pay half of that each in their proposal.
Hayley, anything else on that? You good?
I think it's important to understand that it is separate from SIL. So each person would be considered individually. So like when we put in a SIL roster, you consider all three at once. Whereas these people, if you're doing a service proposal, they will be considered individually.
Yep.
Okay, great. Kelly asked about the line item for ILO. I guess how it's represented in the plan. Is it an actual, does it need to be stated in, it's under core, but is it stated? Do you see it there like you do, or is it flexible?
Both. So it is, if it's in the plan, it will come as a stated support. But because it's in the core, I mean, I know we've accessed and started doing ILO exploration and design in people who haven't had it in their plan because the core is flexible. But you do run the risk, because it's a delegate decision to get it in your plan. If you start using it, you may do this wonderful design and then not actually be approved for ILO. So it's best to get the funding in the plan and get it stated in the plan.
All right, great. Sue at 132, bit of a long one, hoping that Albanese can help us with this, but has she has an AAT case conference number 5 after this, if the agency have changed their minds on the son's single resident that's meant to be SDA robust funding, single resident SDA robust. Don't know how we're going to be able to implement ILO when they feel that he's better living with another complex needs participant who escalates his behaviours, his value for money, and will sustain the agency. The NDIA says they can share support. It's a bit of a big one there. Any comments on that?
I mean, this is happening all the time. I mean, we're finding the individual SDA is becoming harder and harder, and people that clearly need individual are coming out with group SDA, particularly in the robust. I'm hoping that the current changes where they have the home and living panel doing the supports as well as the SDA, that they can see that it could be value for money, that if they get the individual SDA, but they're using less supports, because I think they automatically assume if you're individual that you're going to be a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1 24/7.
Yeah.
Whereas an ILO will be maybe a cheaper package for them, and you might be able to use that as part of an argument to say, hey, we can come in with an individual SDA, but I'm going to reduce my level of support over here using an ILO package, and hopefully that would get it across the line. But we have seen just cuts in funding and everything getting a lot harder, to be honest.
Anything from you, Marita, on that?
No, I think Hayley's covered that really well.
Okay, great. Melinda asked, how do we become an ILO support coordinator other than webinars and experience?
I mean, training. There is, I mean, I don't know if there's specific training. I know with my staff, I worked a lot with the company that Marita worked for in WA to really work out what it looks like. And we developed a whole range of tools to help really guide my staff around how to have those conversations, how to ensure things are person-centered, you know, all of those sorts of things. So, not 100% sure if there is official training in ILO Stage 1, though. Marita, do you know of anything that's...
No, it's not. There's not something that's got any kind of accreditation, but I'll use the opportunity to explicitly say that there's a lot of resources that can assist people develop their knowledge and skills on the website for WA individualised services. So I would encourage you to have a look there, and creating a home is just one that comes immediately to mind. But there's also documents about host and housemates and so a lot of resources that can build your knowledge, and then there are places that you can, where people can develop their skills about person-centered planning.
Okay. Next question, hey Sabine. It's following on from Melinda's one about the qualification. How do you identify that a person is properly qualified? I mean, how do you go about that, Hayley?
I think, Marita, you had a
Yes.
document that you're talking to around, I think it's on the NDIS website, around some of the questions you might ask around when you're engaging someone in individualised living options.
Yeah, so it's a frequently asked question that I think Jessica has the link to, that you can find on the website. Thank you. There's the WACE link, but then there are some scenarios for the options that we've talked about on this presentation about host and housemates. There are some scenarios on the website, and there are also some frequently asked questions, one of which is, what are the questions to ask of anybody, whether it's a peer, a support coordinator, or someone who works as a peer in a capacity building organisation, that gives you some sense of, do they have the right values, and do they have some skill and experience and some knowledge of what's possible.
Okay, we'll leave it that one there. Thank you. Can ILO work in a house that's already providing SIL? So I think the question there, if other tenants are their friends but they don't qualify to be eligible for a SIL.
No. It would be very unlikely that unless that you have chosen to live with 3 other people who are already living together and have got SIL. I think that is a scenario I just find, and then that you'd have flexibility for that person in terms of how they receive their supports to meet their needs. It doesn't. It's not a fit.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think we're going to find a lot more of this coming, because what providers are going to do is just go, oh, well, I've got a vacancy. Doesn't matter how it's funded. If it's ILO, they can still fill the vacancy. But ILO fundamentally is planning, starting with the person, planning the supports out, not here's a support, we can just fit them into that. Yeah. And we're going to see, and that's why I think it's our role as support coordinators to ensure we're asking the questions, and ensuring that every provider is working towards making sure the person's getting what they want and it's what they've asked for, and not providers just trying to make money and fill vacancies.
Cool. Is ILO an option for very high need person, very high needs?
Well, yes, in principle. It depends on the nature of the high level needs. So this is a sort of segue into the next session in a few weeks' time. There's example that comes immediately to mind is someone who has very high physical support needs, but still can spend some time on their own and use an ILO within an environment where their access needs are all met, and they might have some structured supports but on call. So the other, I just want to quickly flag that there will be some situations where people do have very high support needs. They will benefit from an individualised arrangement that is not just rostered hours and across 24 hours of the day, but it will cost more than the level 3 band that is defined as ILO. So they might be termed individual arrangements, but they might not fit in terms of cost. So the person with high support needs will benefit, and their costs could be lower using this mix of support types, could be a lot lower than a rostered 24-hour support worker model, but it won't. It might be funded, but it won't actually get the label or the acronym of ILO, because it could cost more than the upper band of 230.
All right, thank you. Do ILO's providers need to be registered? Do they need to be a registered service provider?
There isn't a registration category separate, the label for ILO, so it is it's the same as everything else, that you can be a provider that's registered or unregistered, and people can. That's what has happened for a number of situations. People can self-manage an ILO.
Okay, so it can be plan managed, because it goes into the next question from Sue. Talks about ILO being early days in Vic. Is there any way the ILO funding can be plan managed? So you're saying it can be plan managed?
It can be, but the most key point here is that the monitoring and design is not going to be the responsibility of the plan manager. So that the monitoring and the tweaking and the potential redesign has to sit with the person or their nominee or their circle of support. That cannot be, and is no way within the scope of a plan manager's responsibility. But you could, people who do that might use a plan manager for the administrative elements of paying for supports.
Okay, so following on for the rest of that, so can it be plan managed where the support coordinator, key worker, therapist collaborate to provide the package for the participant, which also provides? No, okay.
Support coordinators are not the point of ILO monitoring. That is not their role.
And you don't need to do it. At the end of the day, you will have support ILO does not replace support coordination. You'll have your support coordination, and your role will be still overseeing everything else outside of the living arrangement. So it'll be the ILO, whoever's doing the monitoring. It's usually the ILO provider who does the monitoring, and their job is just to keep eyes on the ILO arrangement itself.
Okay. We've got a fair few more questions, and I realise time, so if you do need to drop out, but we'll carry on with the questions if Marita and Hayley, you're okay with that?
Yeah, that's all right.
All right. Who carries the risk if the ILO provider is monitoring the ILO? Who carries the risk if the ILO provider is monitoring the ILO?
Risk is a tricky one. The ILO provider holds a lot of the risk, and it depends on how. I mean, each individual organisation will set the risk up differently. So, yeah, it's a funny one. Like, I know here at Scope, there's certain things that we do, and we had to work quite comprehensively with our legal department to make sure we mitigate the risk in terms of how we provide ILO. But it seems to be a question everyone wants to talk about. When we talk about ILO, Marita, do you have anything else that you want?
So there's providers, and I've been the CEO of one in WA who've been doing this for a long time. And if you think you keep the focus on the individual and talk about what are the risks in their situation. So you will see in the service proposal, and this is absolutely intentional, that there is a question about how have the risks been considered and how will they be mitigated. So you can look at that for the individual and come up with a way that, depending on their circumstances, works. And it might be different. About how that's managed for somebody else in different circumstances. So the obvious things around emergencies and fires and things like that, they need to be considered, but the way that they're managed might be different in different situations. So it's a way of working for the provider that they need to be thoughtful and intentional about, but be willing to do it in different ways for different people.
Great. Will current host providers become ILO providers?
Are we talking about like foster care agencies? Is that what we're talking about?
No, Melinda's still there. If you can clarify, Melinda.
It'll depend, really. It'll be in the way that organisations make decisions about what services and what that they will offer and who they'll work with. So it'll come down.
I think it is fosters, because Carly said back to Melinda, I was just going to ask the same. I have a participant who wants to stay with his foster family, but they aren't attached to an organisation, do they need to be?
Yes. Now that's pretty long. That's a short answer with a lot behind it, but just going, it's good follow on from what we've just talked about. In a host arrangement, there must be an external point of monitoring, and their monitoring and support for both the family and the participant is really important. And so that has to sit somewhere that is entirely appropriate. And if it cannot be the foster family. That is, they are the primary support. They are not the ILO provider.
And it might be, as a support coordinator, you help facilitate that relationship between connecting the current foster care family to an ILO provider and say, are you willing to turn this into a host arrangement, or engage them as part of a host arrangement?
Yeah.
All right, next question. If you have an existing house that meets the individual's needs, but all supports leave, for example, marriage breakup, is ILO the best option? There's no SDA required? Question. Very high complex needs, but wants to live a normal life.
I missed something right at the beginning there about the house and the marriage breakup.
Yeah, I think it's if the person's already in a home that meets
Yes.
their individual needs, but the supports leave because of a situation. Is ILO the best option? So they're already in support, or do they have to go to SDA? Or?
It could be. It could be, yes. It's absolutely worth a good look.
Okay.
So remember, there is a clear separation between the housing and the support. So there's no one type of housing it could look like. I mean, if they've got their own housing already, that is an absolute bonus.
Yeah, they're happy there. It's just about the supports. All right. Can you please explain again why go the ILO path, given its in-depth process, rather than just provide evidence to have their plan increased? And is that not the role of the support coordinator to monitor?
Well, you start with what the first person wants, and not everybody needs more support and wants people on their shoulder all the time when they've got the potential to live a much more independent life. So just increasing supports is not an answer that's necessarily what's best for the person.
And there's also alternate ways that supports can be delivered through ILO. And it's not the role of a support coordinator the support coordinator, your role is to do referrals, but you often have limited funding and limited oversight, realistically. Someone who is providing monitoring under an ILO arrangement, it's going to be far more in depth, far more personalised than what a support coordinator would be doing. Yeah. And you'd still have a support coordinator doing all your stuff, like connecting your therapies, connecting your mainstream, all of those sorts of things. But it is around really having someone there. The monitoring is the key. It really is having someone to help facilitate and redesign, and their entire job is invested in making sure that arrangement works.
All right, Renee's in regional New South Wales. Hayley, you're in regional New South Wales. I don't believe I have an ILO provider in my area. Where do I go next?
Well,
there's one where you are.
I feel you. That is something that I know we've been doing a lot of work on, and I'm happy if you want to email me after. I've been doing a lot of presentations to providers in regional areas to try and get them to understand ILO and maybe consider it, because we do want the people in our regional areas to have choice as well. And at this point, it's fairly limited. So there are a few providers that are doing it and will do it regionally. And I'm happy to, if you reach out, I'm happy to give you some names of some providers that will go regionally depending on where you are.
The other suggestion I would make is, because in WA it started in the regions. We've had a different history and a different, and we had local area coordinators in our regional areas first. But the other suggestion I would if there's a provider who already knows the person well, and they can see what would and have a personal relationship with that person, they may be willing to do what's required for that individual and learn about ILO, and just do, not necessarily sort of do a big thing that they're going to become an ILO provider, but do what needs to be done for that individual. So that would be my starting point for any area where there are some scarce resources.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Marita, and that's what we found here regionally as well. Is a lot of the people that are starting up start from having someone that they already support. They've recognised that an ILO arrangement would be better for them.
All right, thanks for that. How does the payment arrangement work between the provider and the host? Is there a price limit that is applicable, or is it something that needs to be agreed between the host and the provider?
Yes, it needs to be agreed. There are different ways that this can be done, which are not generally in WA. They've been done by paying a tax-free reimbursement. It hasn't been possible at this stage to get that to be something that for which there is a public ruling with the ATO. So, and under that arrangement, it has to not look like a full-time job equivalent in terms of dollars. So that means that does effectively provide a limit, because if it starts to look like a job, then it doesn't fit that criteria. Contracting arrangements are the other mechanism that are used. And you will find that when you start to look at the price, the bands for ILO, that when you have a host arrangement, you're really looking at bands 1 and 2. So that in itself results in an upper limit of payment, because you need to have all the other elements, the supplementary supports and the monitoring in the package as well.
Great. What's the incentive? Oh, it's from Monica, a former colleague of yours, Hayley. Hey, Monica. What's the incentive? Maybe you two should ask this question separately. What's the incentive for ILO Stage 2 provider to get involved in Stage 1 for creating a service proposal? First bit. Is the ILO Stage 2 provider expected to have a separate agreement with host/co-resident? It is going to be taken offline.
Yeah.
We can answer that.
My short answer is the incentive is that you can be more creative when you know the person well and are involved from the design at the beginning. And that quick answer to the agreements is yes, you should always have agreements with housemates and hosts, and again, those resources that I've mentioned, and the one I didn't mention and haven't got just prepared for is that Shared Lives in the UK, they absolutely focus on what we call hosts, and they have a wonderful set of resources.
Okay, great. Anything else, Hayley? Good?
I think the incentive is also that it's important to collaborate. When you in the Stage 1 and Stage 2, in the Stage 1, you've got to be trying to come up with a design that works, but you've also got to make sure that the Stage 2 provider just doesn't come along and provide exactly what they want and take away all the individualized elements of it. So it's important that they work together and come up with something that's appropriate for the customer.
Okay, great. Directories for ILO providers. I mean, you've got the one on the website, but the agency website, but that's may not drill down. Is there any other places to find ILO providers? In Victoria,
Google.
Great.
Google. That's my way of finding everything.
And you've got to be really careful, because it's been perceived as sort of the next bright shiny thing, and I'm aware that there's claims made on websites about providing ILO that you need to really look carefully at and be clear that the provider actually knows what they're doing. So I think it's a matter of going back to the questions that I referred to earlier and be very, very clear about due diligence and asking questions and probing and not committing too early to someone who's willing to give it a go. But I know that's not all that helpful for when you're trying to find someone to ask the questions of. So there are some initiatives that are in early stages at the moment of trying to build the capacity of providers in New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland. So I'm hopeful that won't be such a difficult thing to do in the future, but acknowledge that it can be now. So again, go back to what I said previously. Start with an agency that knows the person, and they might not know much, or they might not be have thought about it yet. But if they're prompted by an individual situation that they're already familiar with, that's a possibility for them. At least they can. It's a known quantity to ask the question.
There's also a group I know where I used to work. They have a business called Hey Hubble, which is a platform as a provider finder. So I'm not sure if they're in Victoria yet, but you can find providers through that platform. Question: can ILO work for a single mother with two sons, all three on the NDIS? They all need support on different levels. As the two boys are 9 and 12, how would this work, and how would the application process be? That sounds like a big one. Is there any immediate things there? I don't think we've got time to go through the whole ins and outs there, but is there anything that grabs you straight away, which would either make them not eligible, or is there a pathway forward?
Look, there isn't. It would be the mum who's eligible for flexible supports, and there'd be a lot of advantage of flexible supports for the whole family unit. So I think and it's not unfamiliar for that sort of situation to have occurred, and have have a good arrangement. So I think that's probably the best I can do with the short answer.
Okay, great, thanks. Can ILO be part of SDA and OOA? Well, we're going to get to that on the 28th of June. Can ILO and SDA work together? And whilst we'll go into more detail on the 28th, the answer to that is yes. I answered one. All right, Steph said, can explore and design be used as an initial step to explore any housing option? Say it doesn't eventuate to ILO, that info can be used to explore things like SDA. Well, that's that home and living process, right? The home and living proposal, is that the form? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's not intended. The whole idea of if you're getting exploration and design, it's to sit around ILO. But you might get through exploration and design and realize it's not going to work, or this is not what they want in the end, and they've decided they've seen a group home that they want to move into, and that's what they want. So not all exploration and design will end in an ILO package, but in order to get exploration, like you wouldn't get exploration in design in your package if you weren't exploring ILO. You would just get it put into your support coordination, extra funding, put in your support coordination to explore housing.
All right, great. One from Letitia. Hey, Letitia. Do ILO also have accommodation, or do they just supply supports? I have someone ILO would suit due to mental health, but no informal supports and wants to move.
It's really important to be considering that the ILO is the support. Where the support's provided is a separate question and has all the alternatives that we know of.
Yeah, I think it's important to realise that there is a housing crisis. ILO isn't the solution to where people are going to live. And we are finding that there are some providers that are getting creative and providing, have units set aside for people with ILO. You've just got to make sure that whatever's being guided is guided around what the individual wants, and they're not getting forced to live in an apartment in a suburb they don't want, and all of a sudden their life doesn't look anything like what they pictured as a good life, because we're just trying to fit in. But at the end of the day, there is a housing crisis, so people are going to take these accommodation options if that is their only option available to them.
Great, thank you. For co-residents, from Rebecca, for co-residents, how does the payment of the subsidised rent actually work? Does the ILO provider take funds to pay the rent directly to the landlord, or does it go to the person as a contribution to their rental amount? Is this then income for the co-resident? I think it's meant to say. Good question on the income piece. I will leave that to the ATO, get some tax advice.
So you need to be really careful that the rent subsidy is part of the ILO package, but it doesn't go to the person. Otherwise, you get into an employment relationship, and that is a high risk. So no, it doesn't go to the person, because that's it creates too much of a risk of them being seen as being in an employment relationship. So.
Okay, great. Does the Stage 2 funding pay for the ILO provider who is monitoring the situation?
Yes, that's why the monitoring is a separate line in the service proposal. That is part of the package. And Hayley and I have been really strong this morning about that being an absolutely essential, critical part of it. So it is part of the funding of the package.
Thank you. We're back to a true list. Are you able to provide a list of true ILO providers that monitor the package in VIC and find the informal supports in the participants' communities? I've spoken to many services and service providers and have yet to connect with one that has capacity.
I am not from Victoria. I'm Scope New South Wales, so I can't really talk to the services in Victoria, but however, I can connect with my fellow Scope Victorian team, because they do exploration and design there too, so they may have a better understanding of who's providing Stage 2 that we can help connect you to.
My only other suggestion is, I don't have a list of true providers, but Belonging Matters as a capacity building organisation, that they are working with families and individuals. They are not working with providers. I want to be really clear about that. But and I also know they have a project to publish a lot of resources around this. So I just haven't suggest that the person asking that question have a look at the Belonging Matters website.
Great. We may have some more information on the 28th as well on that, to see how we go. A couple more questions. Can some supplementary supports be put into daily activities, core supports, and not be stated within the ILO component of the plan?
I guess why? Why would you? When you state, don't forget, an ILO package is flexible and far more flexible than it being stated in their core supports. And you will still have a core support. So your community participation is still separate. So when you're talking to that, if you're talking about, their community participation, that will still sit in their core supports. You'll still have a plan. This is just like your ILO will just be a portion of the customer supports. But if you're wanting, within the ILO supports, you can still use that flexibly, and you can use other providers within that quote. So even though it's a service proposal, there is a lot of flexibility within that funding. Marita, do you have anything to add?
No, no.
Okay, great. 3 more. I haven't had lunch, so it's time for lunch. If a participant requires overnight support inactive, can this work in an ILO model? And what would happen if the support falls through / is away for a night or is away for a night?
It's pretty unusual to have active overnight support in an ILO. It's very active. Did you say active?
Inactive. So if a participant requires overnight support, inactive.
Oh, inactive. Okay. Well, inactive support overnight can be provided in lots of different ways, and then you need to take account of when it might, the housemate might do that generally, but they'll have some time when they go away. So you need to figure out in the package how will you cover that situation. Might the person go and stay with their family? Might be there, have a friend come and stay. So that's all part of the design.
It might be that you have the formal supports come in and live in, for a week while we know that the housemate might go home from every uni holidays. And what do you put in place? And this is where the monitoring is key, because the person who is providing the monitoring is sorting out all these issues as they arrive, and making sure things are running really smoothly.
But you would need to have that kind of capacity in your design and in your service proposal.
Yeah.
And when you apply it, exactly as Hayley says, you've got to be on the ball and planning that well ahead of the person going home for his uni holiday.
All right, second last one. Does a registered SIL provider need to re-register for ILO? No. All right. Tim's asked a bit of a big one, which may need to go back into the recording, which, Tim, you will get the recording if you're still there. What does stage 2 funding pay for? Sort of what you've covered, isn't it, Hayley?
It's whatever the service design has included: primary support, supplementary support, and monitoring.
Yeah, so it incorporates anything that is the execution of the design.
Okay. Yeah, Tim, I don't know, so hence why I asked these guys if it was covered or not. Look, that's all the questions. Thanks, everyone. We've gone 30 minutes over, so thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Marita. Thank you, Hayley, for staying on longer. 31 questions, so very topical. And see everyone on the 28th, where we'll talk about more on ILO, but also how it can work with SDA and other forms of accommodation. Until then, thanks very much. See you later. Bye.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Bye.